Hey everybody, welcome back to Distracted, Quartet
Hi.
of Chaos.
Hello.
We are super psyched to be back. We're talking about the second full-length animated feature film from Walt Disney Animated Studios, which is 1940's Pinocchio. We are super stoked to talk through this and tell you about what we think of the movie.
It really surprised me looking into this that it was 1940. Like, cause I knew it was still early, and I guess after hearing this was after Snow White, it made more sense. But I'm like, wow, this is one that I could not. I would have guessed 60s.
Oh, I know, and we'll get into that. So, as always, I am your host, Aaron, and I have my Quartet of Chaos with me here today. So, our first member is Abby. She is our Figaro.
Yeah. Hello.
Our second member is Adam. He is the Gideon of the group.
So which one's Gideon?
The silent cat with.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the last of the quartet is Andrew. He is our Honest John, Foulfellow the Fox.
I knew it.
Of course. And I'm going to say that I'm Geppetto. So, because I don't know. It made sense when I picked him earlier.
He is the one pulling the strings of this podcast.
Ha 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 ha
That
ha.
was funny.
Good one, Adam. Yeah, it made sense when I picked him earlier, but I don't remember my reasoning. So anyways, we are the Quartet of Chaos. We're super excited to talk about Pinocchio. So we're going to go ahead and get into it. So this is episode number 2, Pinocchio, which was released on February 23rd of 1940. Abby, do you have any nostalgia or memories associated with the movie Pinocchio?
Absolutely none. The first time that I watched Pinocchio was a few days ago. That was it. The only thing that I knew about Pinocchio outside of that was that there was a whale at some point, and I thought he Jonah'd them, and then the whole his nose grows. Then his nose grows when he lies, and
the classic stuff.
The standard. Which when watching the movie, it's not. It only happens once. I thought that was going to be the entire premise of the movie.
Oh, we'll get into that.
But it doesn't. It's only
I was going to get into that later. Yeah.
So yeah, that was a shock. But that's it.
Cool. Well, I'm excited to hear your opinions in a minute because this was your first viewing of it. So, Adam, do you have any nostalgia or memories associated with Pinocchio?
Only sing-along VHSs, specifically High Diddly D, and
I've got no strings.
Little bit of No Strings on Me, but more of High Diddly D. And then I never watched it as a kid because Monstro scared the tar out of me.
Yeah, basically.
Rightfully so.
He's kind of creepy. Andrew, any memories for you?
Whale's got teeth. It's terrifying.
Same with Adam. Adam and I watched the old Disney sing-along VHS tapes all the time as kids, and so that's most of our Disney song knowledge. It comes from those, so it's very easy for us to forget that there are other songs that exist in movies when they weren't in those videos. So it's mostly High Diddly D, because that one I think was on one of the ones we played more than I've Got No Strings, but that one was definitely on one as well. And then When You Wish Upon a Star was another one, and that's just kind of the Disney theme song in general.
I always forget that's from Pinocchio.
That is from Pinocchio, because it's just such a broad Disney thing now. It's in all the advertising. But I didn't watch this much as a kid either. But I don't think it had to do with Monstro. I think it had more to do with the fact that the kids turned into donkeys and got sold. So
didn't bother me as much for some reason. I don't know why.
I don't know. That's definitely human trafficking there. So that I think that freaked me out more than anything. Was I was a very goody kid, and so these kids are drinking and smoking and turn into donkeys, and I'm like, I don't like this.
Yeah,
This entire movie was just telling kids don't do drugs.
Yeah, seriously.
Dude, if this movie was made today, I would be like, yeah, no, they're laying on the allegory's a little heavy-handed. There's human trafficking. There's I had like 4 or 5 that I was picking out, and I'm like, is that what this is? Are you making observations on
were
the
these
morality?
as big of a problem in 1940 as they are today?
Right, like the morality of essentially what Stromboli does was like you're making a half a cent for this, like actors being overexposed for their work
and underpaid
and different things. I'm like, when was this made?
Right.
Yeah.
Ahead of its
Seriously.
time?
Yeah. So to echo Andrew and Adam, we didn't really watch this much growing up. We had the sing-along song VHSs that some of them had some Pinocchio songs on it. So we were familiar with the plot of the story, and we were familiar with the songs and the characters. This isn't one we watched much, but much like many of the movies that you'll hear us talk about, we owned this one on VHS. It's in our movie library. Yep. I couldn't tell you when we got it, how long we've had it, how many times we've watched it. I don't know, but it's one we've had and rewatched very rarely. But it's one that I thought we had all seen and knew pretty well. Abby's throwing a wrench in that. So, but now that we have gone back and revisited it, Abby, what do you think of it?
Y'all are gonna hate me for this, but I honestly liked Snow White better.
Ooh.
Because, well, I guess just I had a lot more familiarity with Snow White.
You must be grumpy.
I saw Adam die a little bit. Adam, some life left Adam's eyes just then. Oh my god!
I can't comment on this yet. I have to continue.
Okay, give me a second to explain. So, okay. First of all, just a lot of parts of this movie kind of disturbed me a little bit, like with the whole Pleasure Island thing and all that. Like it was some bold choices, which yeah, I get. They were definitely trying to put that message through, and they successfully did for 21-year-old Abby. I was like, I'm never gonna drink or something. I don't know about y'all. I don't want to turn into a donkey. So, but I don't know. It just seemed like it was cute. Don't get me wrong. It was cute at parts, but a lot of it was just, oh, he gets in trouble. Oh, he gets out of trouble. Oh, he gets back into trouble. Oh, he's getting swallowed by a whale. Just stuff like that. So,
as opposed to the beautiful pacing and story of Snow White, which is I ran into the woods and stayed there for an hour.
I thought you were going to get into it.
I'm sorry.
Okay, look, I don't have a solid reason to like Snow White more, but I just do, okay? But yeah, okay, it was a good movie. I won't get it wrong. Yes, a lot more happened than Snow White. I will give it that. Like, it was much more eventful and everything. But I didn't personally enjoy it as much. Not saying it was a bad movie. It was a good movie.
It definitely doesn't give you the same warm, fuzzy feeling as Snow White does in some parts. Yeah, so I will absolutely understand that.
It was a little bit darker, and I wasn't expecting it to be as dark, which means nothing compared to some other movies. But
yeah, that's okay. And that's something that's good to keep in mind is every single Disney animated film that we're going to go over is somebody's favorite movie that's ever been created. And it's also somebody's least favorite movie that's ever been created. The following of the Disney franchise is so huge that there's not a single Disney movie that isn't somebody's all-time favorite movie. But that's why we're here, is we're talking about our opinions. Yeah. And so even if we hate a movie, we know it's somebody's favorite, so we're going to give it some grace. We're not just going to totally garbage
or that someone out there does agree with us not liking it.
Yeah. Or, if it's our absolute favorite movie, we know that there's somebody out there that doesn't like it. So I'm more than willing to look at my favorite movies and look for, something that wasn't good about it. I'm more than willing to find pros and cons. So that's okay. We want some cons, Abby. We're here for this.
I will be the Adam today.
Yes. And speaking of Adam, I'm curious.
Oh, okay, that's fair.
I'm curious to hear Adam's opinions now.
So I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would after Snow. And maybe it's because my expectations were really low after how I felt about Snow White. But like, first 10 minutes of this movie, I was like, oh my gosh, I have been sleeping on this movie. This is fantastic. The later it goes on, the more I'm like, okay, I'm seeing the cracks. It definitely has some issues. And basically because like first 10 to 30 minutes, I was ready to like give it a 9 out of 10. And then as different things, and I'll get to actual ranking into podcast, but once different things actually started happening, it did like, okay, this and then this. Because I do think it has some major pacing issues and some real story problems that I'll get into in the later. But overall, I actually really liked it. Pinocchio is way more infuriating than I thought he would be.
I was expecting that from you, Adam, but I'm glad that you liked it because that's exciting. I was expecting some negativity from you. So, Andrew, what'd you think?
Same. Yeah, I was expecting negativity from me too.
I actually really enjoyed Pinocchio more than I was expecting. Like Adam, especially because of how early we are right after Snow White. They took a lot of really good steps between Snow White and Pinocchio, in my opinion. There were a few parts that I think it did feel like it was dragging a little, or I just wasn't super interested. But for the most part, I really enjoyed this movie. A lot more than I remember ever enjoying it. I think part of it is I'm older. I understand a lot more of what's happening now, and there are a lot more adult or mature jokes that I didn't realize as a kid that I was able to enjoy this time. So, so that helped add to the enjoyment as well, I think. So, but yeah, I thought it was good.
Yeah, I want to echo that. I really enjoyed Pinocchio. I was expecting it to be one of the movies that I enjoyed, but it wasn't like, hitting out of the ballpark.
I was
firing on all cylinders,
middle of the pack.
Exactly, and to be honest, I was kind of shocked at how much I enjoyed it. Me and Abby watched it together a couple days ago, and I felt so many different emotions watching this movie. I didn't really talk to you about this, Abby, after we watched it. I wanted to save it. But I felt so many emotions. Like, I was genuinely sad at a couple parts. I laughed out loud a lot. Abby could attest to that. I laughed out loud. I was, like, irritated at parts. Like, I felt emotions. And
I was irritated.
It's like, this movie was made in 1940. This movie was made, like, 80 years ago? Yeah, like 80 years ago. And it brought emotion out of me. I was like, I just wasn't expecting that. So I was pleasantly surprised with Pinocchio, and I'm excited to dig into it. But before we dig into it, I do want to share some fun facts with y'all. So, Pinocchio,
away, sir.
The budget for Pinocchio was $2.6 million, which again nowadays isn't a super mind-boggling number, but back in 1940, just like with Snow White, that's a huge number for 1940. The opening weekend of their theatrical release, Pinocchio made $3.76 million. So it was a success. It did break even and a little bit above that, but by film standards go, as we talked last time, if you can triple what you spent, you're considered a success. So theatrical release, it was not considered a success by film standards because it didn't even double what they spent. But they did make more than they spent. And now worldwide, over
they still
time,
made it turn to profit.
Yeah, absolutely. They still turned a profit. And worldwide, the Pinocchio franchise has now grossed over $121 million. So it went from being an okay movie in theatrical release. It was really well accepted. It just wasn't as big of a hit as Snow White was. But over time, Pinocchio has become such a classic that everybody knows. Everybody knows the story of Pinocchio with the nose that grows. Everybody knows that. And that's definitely seen in the financial world. So,
I mean, it's gone on to be referenced throughout so many different media and stories, like the Shrek movies. You hear, like, you'd see in like Looney Tunes and stuff where their nose would grow sometimes when they lied, and it would just be a little reference to Pinocchio. You know, it's just such a widely known thing now because it's been so just put out there throughout all the different social like media and pop culture.
Like anyone would know about that reference without even watching Pinocchio.
Yeah.
Like anyone would know that that's where that's from.
Yeah.
You don't have to have seen the Disney original Pinocchio to know the story of Pinocchio as a wooden boy. Like, it's just become such a classic. And Disney was, I think, the reason for that becoming such a classic was because they tackled that. So we have a lot of directors like last time. We've got Norman Ferguson, he. I'm not joking. It's T like the initial and then he, which I think is just funny.
That's hilarious. I'm sorry. I think that's
no. I'm sure he was a wonderful man, but that's just hilarious to me. His name is T. But anyways, don't let me get distracted.
At least you know that anyone is happy when they hear about his name.
Exactly. We've also got Jack Kinney, Hamilton Luske, Bill Roberts, and 2 directors that returned from Snow White, Ben Sharpstein and Wilfred Jackson. So those 2 got to come back and direct that one as well. I know Adam was shocked at how many directors are in one movie, but this is animation, so it's different. Yeah, that's 7. Last time it was 6. This time it's 7.
So I do have to ask: are these like directors, or some of these animation directors, some of these storyboard directors?
These are all listed under the title director.
Because that is because I know like even nowadays a lot of movies have 17 directors under different things, but still, if it's directed by James Gunn, it's directed by James Gunn, and then everybody else is supporting.
And it may have been that they helped direct in different places and that weren't all like the main director, but on IMDb and Wikipedia, they were all listed under the term director. So, I mean, that's the only description I could give you. So Pinocchio was reissued in theaters 7 times. The last time it was reissued in theaters was 1992, which is around the same time that Snow White was reissued for the last time, because that was around when home video started coming out. So it was reissued every 7 to 10 years, which is pretty typical, and those reissues are what helped it gain that title of cult classic and get to be having grossed so much worldwide. Pinocchio was the first animated feature to win an Academy Award. It actually won 4. So it won 2 awards for Best Original Score and 2 awards for Best Original Song, which is When You Wish Upon a Star. So
I mean, that is like Disney's theme.
It is. When You Wish Upon a Star became the theme of Disney. And I mean, not only was it the first movie to win an Academy Award, it won 4. So that's pretty cool. I discussed the 9 old men on the last episode. So if you haven't listened to the last episode, the 9 old men are 9 famous animators that worked for Disney that were a humongous part in creating what we know as Disney. I mean, the style, the characters, the scenes, what we know of as Disney animation that most of us have grown up with are because of the 9 old men. Whether or not they were the ones that animated it or they trained the animators that went on to animate things. They were huge, and they were all present from Snow White on for a long time. And of course, all 9 old men were still present for this movie. But a couple things I wanted to mention for them were Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston were the animators that animated Pinocchio, the character, which is really impressive looking at the movie because they did so many cool things with Pinocchio, the way that he moves and the way that he actually looks like he's wooden. And the things he does whenever in Little Wooden Head, when Geppetto's moving him and he goes to see Cleo, and the way he distorts in the water bowl as he's moving, that's mind-blowing.
I have that in my notes about the note is horror movie Pinocchio in fishbowl.
Literally, but
that is very well done animation.
And that was hand drawn in 1940. Like that just shows the skill of these animators. And Frank and Ollie did so many cool things. I mentioned on the last episode. Documentary on Disney Plus called Frank and Ollie about Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. It's really cute. I would definitely recommend it if any of you are into documentaries. It's all about their process as animators and their journey through Disney. It's really, really cool. So yeah, they were in charge of animating Pinocchio. Milt Kahl and Ward Kimball both were two of the 9 old men that helped and were in charge of animating different scenes of Jiminy Cricket. And Eric Larson was the animator for Figaro, Cleo, the marionette puppets, and the donkeys. So he was a big part of animation for this movie, which is cool to think that this one guy was in charge of so much and so many pivotal parts of this movie. So that's your little 9 old men update. A couple notable voice actors. There was supposed to be dialogue for Gideon, the mute cat that walks around with Honest John, and they had cast Mel Blanc to voice him, and Mel Blanc has voiced over 1,000 animated characters. He is so famous. He's done so many Looney Tunes characters. He was
most of the Looney
Bugs Bunny,
Tunes,
right?
He's most of the Looney Tunes.
He's most of the Looney Tunes. He recorded the entire movie, the entire script of Gideon in 16 days, and then they cut it. And they decided, because Snow White was such a success, they wanted to have another mute character like Dopey because people love Dopey so much. And so they were trying to...
Yeah, that had very similar vibes, for sure.
Yeah, they were trying to
I
recreate
think that was a misstep.
I think so, too.
I think that's a misstep.
Mel Blanc is so wonderful. I think they could have done so much.
Where they're coming from. Exactly. Mel Blanc, I think he would have brought so much life to, I think that would have been a key Disney character had he gotten a chance to put some life into him, because my man knows how to absolutely just chew with a character.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh,
and the fact that
he fully understands the characters he voices, like Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, most of the Looney Tunes, like we said, they are memorable, and you remember them because of the life he helped put into them. You know, he helped breathe life into these characters through his iconic voices for them. And to this day, I don't think any of them have changed the voices. People do impressions of Mel Blanc's voices for these characters because they became so iconic. Exactly. So I think if they hadn't cut his the script with Gideon and everything, I think he could have been fairly memorable. I think that would have been a whole different movie almost.
Which he was technically still in the movie because Gideon hiccups 3 different times. So they took one single recording of him hiccuping, and he went uncredited for years.
Bro, for years and years, he was 16 days to get 3 hiccups.
Yep.
He went uncredited for 16 years.
He went uncredited for so long.
For how many years?
I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
He said he recorded for 16 days.
16 days.
It took him 16 days to record everything. But he went uncredited as Gideon's vocal effects for so long. And people finally credited it to him. And I'm like,
good.
I mean, he deserves to be a Disney character with how infamous his voice is. And I just wish that he could have gone down in more infamy in Disney than Gideon. You know?
Yeah. Then the non-speaking role. Yeah. He hiccups.
Exactly.
But
exactly.
This has nothing to do with anything we've been talking about other than it's about Mel Blanc, real quick.
Okay.
But that was a fantastic hiccup. But it's just a fun little fact that I learned. Mel Blanc was actually allergic to carrots, and I always found that fascinating because his most well-known character is Bugs Bunny. He always chews on the carrots.
Wonderful. I love that. So
either allergic to or hated them, one or the other.
Either one's funny. A couple other voice acting credits I want to call out is the voice of Jiminy Cricket is Disney legend Cliff Edwards. And he's not a Disney legend for having done lots of characters. He's a Disney legend because he is Jiminy Cricket. And he is the one that sang When You Wish Upon a Star. Okay. He is the legend that performed the Disney legend song.
Be kind of in that spot.
Exactly. Yeah. And anytime, I'm pretty sure that I'm correct in this. I could be wrong. I didn't do enough research. So, don't at me. Don't fact check me. I'm pretty sure anytime you ever hear Jiminy Cricket, because Jiminy Cricket appears in a lot of movies. There's actually a couple of the package films we're going to get into in a couple movies. Jiminy Cricket is the narrator for some of them. And I'm pretty sure that anytime you ever hear Jiminy Cricket, it is always voiced by Cliff Edwards. I'm pretty sure even after he passed, if they had to, I'm sure they
Even
would
in
have taken
Kingdom Hearts
old
3?
voice. Oh, they probably have just continued to take old voice recordings and mashing them up to make stuff. And I could be wrong. They could have found someone that sounds like him, but
I can hear it for at least some of it. But like with him saying, "Sora, we have to go to the world that never was." I'm pretty sure that's a new line.
There's almost
somewhere.
Okay, Adam, that's Kingdom Hearts. I think the only person that came back and voiced their character for Kingdom Hearts is Hades, so we can't really compare that.
We can if we want to.
I'm not going to get into it because I can think of
Was
like
that
3 others
James
that may
Woods?
have, but it's not. It's actually James Woods. Yes.
Oh my gosh, that's right.
If not, it's a
very good impression.
Good match.
Yeah. But back to Jiminy Cricket though, they actually brought Jiminy Cricket to like quote unquote host like House of Mouse on some episodes and like some of the sing along VHS tapes and everything. Like Jiminy Cricket has just become an icon.
Oh yeah.
He has become probably top 5 most recognizable Disney characters ever.
Definitely.
Maybe top 10 with some of the newer characters coming out, like Anna and Elsa. But he's up there with Mickey and Winnie the Pooh and Tinkerbell and such. Like he's up there with those icons.
Like, itself. Tinkerbell, Jiminy Cricket are 2 kind of like mascots.
Oh yeah, Tinkerbell and Jiminy Cricket and Winnie the Pooh are probably the 3
It does not have to be their franchise. You will find them.
Those are probably the 3 characters that have been more popular than Mickey Mouse.
I don't think more popular than Mickey Mouse, personally.
Oh,
Donald Duck.
Yeah,
Donald Duck has been more popular than Mickey Mouse.
Speaking of Donald Duck, thank you for the segue, Andrew. Speaking of Donald Duck,
welcome.
The voice effects of Figaro, Clarence Nash was the original voice for Donald Duck.
Oh,
so that's pretty cool.
Oh, really?
That's fun.
Cool.
And then the last one I want to go ahead and call out right now is the vocal effects for Monstro. It is a man named Thurl Ravenscroft.
Ravenclaw?
Ravencroft. Abby, stop.
Okay.
Honestly, I was going to make a joke about it actually being Dory and she was uncredited, but I love that name so much more. That's such a cool name.
Well,
you could have honestly said Monstro was done by D. Bradley Baker, and I would have believed you.
That's funny, Andrew. But y'all need to get used to hearing Thurl Ravenscroft because he is a Disney legend. He's been in so many Disney movies. You're going to hear him for decades. Or decades of movies that we cover. We're not
nice.
I like his name.
But,
I knew what you meant, but I'm excited.
A couple notable things that Thurl Ravenscroft has done. He was the voice of Tony the Tiger for Frosted Flakes for over 5 decades.
Oh.
And he sang...
he's the one that sang You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch.
Yes, he was the uncredited voice of You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch for years.
Oh, he's uncredited.
And was finally given credit where credit is due because Thurl Ravenscroft is the most beautiful bass voice you will ever hear.
He has a very wonderful
100%
voice.
agree.
Yeah.
He deserves that credit for sure.
Yes, he was credited for Monstro.
He wasn't credited for the singing of You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch, but he was credited for the voice of a whale.
Again, I'm getting my information, some of it's off Wikipedia, so it's not like it's the most factual. So, I could be wrong, but this is just what I'm sharing.
Take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, so I will share some of the other voice actors as we get to their characters in the movie, but those are the ones that were notable.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and dive into Pinocchio.
I hear your cats running around in the background.
I know. I'm sorry to my listeners. I have 2 cats, and they're unique animals.
They're insane.
You'll probably hear them.
They got the zoomies.
They always have the zoomies 24/7.
They live the zoomies.
So you'll probably hear their little bell collars jingling during podcasts, but just ignore it. It's fine. So we open up Pinocchio with Jiminy Cricket, voiced by Cliff Edwards, singing When You Wish Upon a Star. And it is a beautiful, beautiful cover.
I had a lot of problems with the last intro because it was the most boring thing ever. I love this intro.
It's so good.
It's When You Wish Upon a Star. It's the Disney song. We've talked about that.
It's the intro to every movie ever. the background music. I mean, it's become infamous.
Yeah,
This one
exactly.
was
Yeah.
much
But
more entertaining.
I think what makes it infinitely better. Sorry, you go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You finish.
Okay, so I think this one makes it so much better because he's singing, and then once the credits have stopped and the song is over, it goes straight into him narrating and setting the scene, and it's such a seamless transition
Oh yeah.
that it's honestly perfect. Like 0 notes. I'm like, this is actually wonderful. They really learned what they did wrong in Snow White and absolutely fixed everything and made it so much more engaging.
I really like that it sets the movie up as well to be seen and told from Jiminy Cricket's point of view. He's the one basically narrating the movie because of this, and it works very well. I think it's a very good choice on their part.
That does make it a lot easier to understand what's happening, and it was a lot more entertaining going into that than just having to read a screen. And it was really cool with like when it showed his point of view going into Geppetto's house. That little hopping with the camera,
yeah, I really liked that
quote unquote camera. That was really cool. So they did do very good on that. I will say I enjoyed that.
Yeah. We talked last time about how Disney takes every single thing that they did in Snow White and they learned from it. And Disney's always been really good about learning from their mistakes and from the past. And they took everything that was good about Snow White and they went with it and made it even better. And they took everything that was a mistake in Snow White and that didn't work and they fixed it and they worked on it. We talked about they knew how to keep, especially a childhood audience, but they knew how to keep their audience involved and drawn in, but they didn't have a good way. They didn't, in our opinion, they didn't succeed in capturing the audience's attention at the beginning. It took a little bit of time to get into Snow White, and they learned from that. And immediately on the next movie, they immediately grab your attention, even though it's credits at the beginning. Hearing Cliff Edwards sing that, and it's not just a background score, was already more entertaining. And then you get into Jiminy Cricket sitting in front of this book.
Part of what helped make it good.
Yeah, and then you get into Jiminy Cricket immediately sitting in front of this book, preparing to tell you about the story. And it's just so inviting. And Jiminy Cricket has such a wonderful personality. Cliff Edwards made the voice acting that he did made Jiminy Cricket feel so personable and inviting. Like I felt like I was having a conversation with this cricket when he opened. And I think it's just so cool how they took the time as animators to, when he opens the book and he can't get the page to stay, they took the time to animate him moving that candle holder to hold the page there. They didn't have to do that. They could have just let the book stay open, but they wanted to give him that personality. And like there are those tiny touches of details all throughout the
It gave him life.
Exactly, that give them so much more life. They feel like such real characters, whereas in Snow White, a lot of the dwarves and a lot of the characters felt a little more generic. And so I think it's just really cool to see how in only 3 years they learned from all of the lessons that they had in Snow White, and they improved on that.
I will say,
yeah, like in Snow White, a lot of the characters were very one note.
Yeah,
but this is going to happen a lot during this podcast. Is I will agree on a lot of things that this was a much better movie than Snow White. I think it's just because I didn't have the nostalgia for this one, and it was the first time I watched it, and so I can't really remember that much of it. So if I watched it like again after this, and then be like, oh yeah, I totally agree with all that stuff. But this was just overall general. So I do appreciate the movie.
Oh yeah. So fun fact: when the camera first shows Jiminy Cricket and starts zooming in on him, if you look in the back, you can see a book that has on the spine, it says Alice in Wonderland, which is a nod to the fact that Disney...
I love that.
One of the first things that they did, they called them the Alice shorts. It was supposed to be kind of like Alice in Wonderland, but it was shorts of this real girl who they filmed her walking around and interacting, and then they drew in these characters. So she was interacting with animated characters, kind of like Mary Poppins, but this was in like the late 20s, early 30s that they were doing.
That sounds a lot like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but so much earlier.
Yeah, Disney continued to do that style and still does with like Enchanted and Mary Poppins and Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Pete's Dragon. Like they've done that a lot, but it started like that. And from those Alice
Song
shorts,
of the South.
that was one of the movies that Walt always wanted to do, was Alice in Wonderland. That was his plan, was for that to be the first movie that they released. But they weren't able to make that work financially, and it took over a decade to get it out, because Alice in Wonderland is like the 12th movie or something like that. So it took him a while, but this was one that Walt wanted to get done so bad. And so that's a really cool reference to that. I mean, 10, 12 years before they released the movie, they have that book there because that was a story that Walt loved. So I thought that was a really cool touch, and I'd never noticed that until this viewing.
That's so
anyways,
cool.
we jump into the movie. Oh, sorry, I have a hair in my mouth. How gross. We jump into the movie, and Jiminy Cricket is a little homeless cricket hopping on the streets, and he's just trying to find a place to warm his backside, as he says. And he sees a place with a light on, and it turns out to be Geppetto's. So he, as Abby mentioned a minute ago, he hops towards Geppetto's. And I love the way that they make the camera look like you're Jiminy Cricket and you're hopping towards it. It's really cool stuff that they do. Which I watched an interview with Walt, where he had talked about all the profits they got from Snow White. They used to build the studio. They built a physical studio as well as upgraded all their stuff. And they used some of that money to build a new camera that let them put depth and range, like physical front to back range in their animation. Like the way that they were able to film it, they were able to get more depth. And you can see that in that first popping scene. And you'll see it in a little bit when they kind of introduce the village, and they have that like one take looking scene where they kind of sweep through the village. Because of that new camera, they were able to do some of that. Which that was a cool interview. I'll have to talk about that in a little bit. But Jiminy gets to Geppetto's, and he slips under the door, and he sees that there's nobody there. So he goes over to the fire and uses one of the hot coals to warm his butt. And he is trying to make himself at home just because he wants a warm place to sleep. And then Geppetto comes back in, and he sees that Geppetto is sitting at a desk working on something. So he is climbing over stuff to try to get a better view. And he finally sees that it is a wooden puppet, a marionette. And Geppetto is sitting there working on this puppet, talking to his kitten Figaro and his goldfish Cleo.
Figaro, I will say, is the best character.
Figaro's great.
Figaro
That's why I gave you Figaro.
Was great.
And
Figaro
while we're here,
is so sassy, and I think half of it's deserved. Half of it is like you deserve this.
Figaro is cute.
Yeah.
The amount of crap that cat went through.
I know that poor cat. Anyways, while we're here, Geppetto was voiced by Christian.
That cat has also gone on to become Minnie Mouse's cat.
Terrorizing that cat with the puppet.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, Andrew. Figaro for years and years ended up being Minnie Mouse's cat in a lot of the shorts and
oh my gosh, you're right.
Cartoons and stuff. Yeah,
oh,
ended up being Minnie's.
I mean, he still is, like, in some of the newer stuff. Like, you'll still see him every now and then, like Mickey Mouse Clubhouse and some other the newer Mickey Mouse stuff.
Fun fact: it's either Disneyland California or Disneyland Paris. There's a land somewhere where if you look up on a balcony on one of the buildings, you can see Figaro napping. There's like a statue of a napping Figaro on one of the balconies.
Oh,
which is pretty cool because Figaro is a more is a more forgotten character, so it's cool to see that. But now that we've introduced Geppetto, he was voiced by Christian Rubb, and I didn't write it down. I thought no, Cleo didn't have any vocal effects. Sorry. So that's Geppetto. So then you see Geppetto finishing the puppet, and then he decides to name it Pinocchio. He asks Figaro and Cleo if they like that name, and they both say absolutely not. And he says, well, guess what? Pinocchio likes the name, so he's Pinocchio. And then we get into...
I love the fact that every single clock in that place goes off, and he's like, I wonder what time it is.
Oh my gosh, I know.
Like, sir!
Geppetto is such a...
That cracked me.
Yes, we said the same thing. He's like, I wonder what time it is. It pulls out his small little pocket watch to find out what time it is, instead of looking at the one of the hundreds of clocks on the wall.
Good old Geppetto.
So there's a reason you only have a cat and a fish to keep you company.
I know, he's so funny. So he names the puppet Pinocchio, and goes into the song Little Wooden Head, where he's dancing around the room. He turns on his music boxes and starts dancing around, singing about how
song.
Pinocchio. Oh, it's one of my favorites. I love this song. So he's dancing around singing Little Wooden Head, and he beats up on Figaro. And, I actually love that when he kicks Figaro in the butt.
So I'm going to make a point here that this movie, as opposed to the last one, I think there are no bad songs in this movie. I think there's a couple that are a little weaker. Yeah, but I think all of them. I think this is probably the weakest song, and it's still a bop. It's still really good.
Great.
Yeah, I agree. So we have the cute song "Little Wooden Head," where he's dancing around with Pinocchio.
At this point, Jiminy's hilarious.
Oh my gosh, the amount of jokes that Jiminy makes—it's so funny, and
the way he interacts with the clock.
I love it.
Yeah, I thought it was all going to be forced jokes that didn't work, and it was a lot of really fun visual gags.
Oh, I love it. Jiminy has
it all works really well.
He has a crush on every little carving of a female character on any of the clocks and music boxes, and it's so funny. Just the way that he tries to cut in with the two that are dancing.
They're very consistent with Jiminy Cricket having a weakness for women.
Yeah, he's got a fluttery heart. He likes all the gals. He thinks they're all beautiful. So there's a lot of fun visual gags with Jiminy.
Also, for the second movie in a row, we've got Breaking and Entering. He's a bug, so I get a little more leeway, but I'm gonna see how long we go until there's not.
I mentioned that whenever I first watched it, and I was like, I love how he's like, yep, this works. Just make himself at home.
Yep, I was completely expecting that.
I have more to say about it in a little bit, but it's yeah.
Yeah, so Jiminy does technically trespass, but he's just a little homeless cricket who needs a warm fire. So we'll give him a pass. Plus, Cliff Edwards does such a wonderful job. So
homeless cricket, princess. I don't really see a difference.
Right, exactly. So, anyways, after the song ends, that's where what Abby brought up. All of his cuckoo clocks, which fill the wall, start going off, and there's a ton of fun visual gags with the clocks. You can tell the animators had such a good time with. There's the woman spanking the sun, and the guy drinking the alcohol, and the guy trying to shoot the bird, and the fishing. There's so many cute visual gags that you can tell the animators had such a good time. Yes, Adam.
Which shooting the bird is just such a fun adult joke snuck in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I agree that I think this scene is very fun, and it's like, hey, we get to have just some fun visual gags. We get to let the animators go nuts for a second. It also starts going on a little too long. I'm going to go ahead and say this was my first thing in the movie where I'm like, okay, moving on.
Yeah, I could see that.
It lasted for almost 3 minutes.
Did it really?
It didn't bother me too much.
I didn't realize that.
I may be exaggerating. I'm not 100% sure, but I felt I was feeling the time.
Yeah. So in the live action Pinocchio that just came out a couple weeks ago, which I'm not going to get into that movie because I didn't really like it personally, but I don't want to be controversial. The cuckoo clock gags, almost every single clock was a reference to a Disney movie. So there was one with the old hag witch.
Yeah, I saw that
out the window, and there was a lot of really cute gags there. That was the one part of the movie I enjoyed, the live action one.
Finish the movie.
No, I didn't finish it because I didn't.
I'm not sure if I like that or not because it's a lot. It is fun, but it almost feels like Disney very much patting themselves on the back.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's cute. Just cute little ways to reference their old movies.
I think that they're allowed to gloat a little bit if they did make.
I mean, they have become an empire. But anyways, so
yes, they are a dynasty at this point.
Seriously. So they finish their little song, and when the clocks go off and Geppetto is dumb and looks at a pocket watch instead, he realizes, oh, it's late. So they go to bed. He sets Pinocchio down, and he and Figaro go to bed, and he keeps talking to Figaro, and Figaro's like, bro, I'm trying to sleep. And every time he closes his eyes, Geppetto goes, oh, Figaro. And Figaro's like, what? I would like to sleep.
And then he makes him go and close the window.
I have been woken up twice.
And he goes,
the window,
he goes,
which is
"Oh,
right next to
Figaro,
his bed.
I left the window closed." And Figaro's like, "Bro, I have to go over you to get to
He
that."
said, "Do it yourself."
But he's a good cat, and he does it. And then
You're right next
Geppetto's
to
like,
it.
I know. And then Geppetto's like, "The wishing star," and he sees the big old star in the sky. So he makes a wish on the star that Pinocchio would be a real boy, because wouldn't it be grand for him to have a real boy? And then he makes Figaro open the window, and Figaro very cleverly is like, "Well, since I'm up here, I'm gonna sleep on the good bed." So Figaro gets in the good bed. Good for Figaro. And so then they go to sleep. And then one of the best things ever, Jiminy Cricket's trying to sleep, and all the clocks are ticking at different times, and he can't sleep.
I have notes about this.
I love this. And so he finally gets so fed up with, between that, Geppetto snoring, the bubbles from Cleo, all the clocks ticking, he finally just shouts, "Quiet!" And all the clocks stop. Like the pendulums are stuck in midair.
The house
and
he does not own. In the house he was not invited to. He's like, "Everyone shut up. I can't sleep."
However, I can relate to that, because anytime, like, I know sleeping in a new place, it's very difficult. Like, you notice everything. You're super aware of everything. I definitely understand why it would be hard to sleep in a clockmaker's house. But also, like you said, it's not his house. So he should just try to either leave or just suck it up.
Also, the amount of places that he has slept in this movie. I know he was he was against one of the clocks. He was in a box of matches. He
does sleep in lots of places. He's not afraid
He's
to
on
make
like
himself
a violin.
Yeah, he's not afraid to make himself known. But he somehow manages to be all powerful and makes the clock stop in mid tick, which is a fun visual gag.
He freezes time.
He has
He does. It's
time.
You know, I always knew Jiminy Cricket was magical, but man, I'll tell you what.
He is a conscience.
So then at that moment, the sky starts to get bright, and he's like, "What's happening?" And all of a sudden, the evening wishing star comes in and turns into...
I appreciate his appropriate reaction to that. Instead of being like, "Oh, what's that?" He's like, "What the heck? What is happening?"
Yeah, he's like, "What's going on?"
He's running.
And the evening star turns into the Blue Fairy. And the Blue Fairy is voiced by Evelyn Venable. Venable. I don't know how to say that. I'm pretty sure she was
Aaron,
in a lot of stuff.
I just had a question real quick. I didn't know. Do you know if the Blue Fairy, was she rotoscoped? Because she looked like she might be.
I was
not
thinking,
sure.
like, she looks like she's in a different movie.
I'm not sure. They did a lot of rotoscoping.
If you had any information on that or not.
No, in the interview I watched with Walt, they did a lot of rotoscoping for references. So they would have people dress in similar outfits and do poses and stuff that they would take pictures of and use that as references for their drawings and animation. I know they did it for some of Jiminy Cricket's scenes, like where he was warming his backside at the fire. They did some pictures of that for reference.
I've seen a video of how they did it for Tinkerbell.
Because
so
like with large props.
I'm sure they probably did some.
Most of the people, like humans in this movie, looked like they belonged in this movie. They looked very cartoonish. They fit the world. Whereas she looked more like she was from Snow White or something. Her animation was different, so I didn't know if they completely rotoscoped her or what. I'm
not sure. I think they did it on purpose though, because she's not supposed to be of that world. You know, she's this magical, mystical fairy. She's supposed to look different and
it definitely
not like
works.
she fits into the world. So I think it works.
It doesn't even explain like her. All they know is like, "Oh, you wish on a star, boom, she's gonna make your wish come true." And it's kind of just.
You didn't question that it didn't explain why there are 7 dwarfish men living in the forest.
I did remember.
Okay.
I did question that.
Well, anyways, the Blue Fairy comes in, and
you didn't question how she was able to make an apple poison.
Okay, whatever. We're done.
It's Disney. It's magical. So speaking of magical, the Blue Fairy brings Pinocchio to life. He's not a real boy, but he is a real live wooden boy. And she's talking to him, and of course, because he was born literally 5 seconds ago, he doesn't understand anything. And he's trying to grasp the fact that he is real. and she's telling him like, you can become a real boy if you can prove to be brave and courageous and selfless and trustworthy. And
Which
he's
is
like,
really funny because that describes none of humanity.
well, yeah,
but Pinocchio fails to do all of that, so he fits right in.
Which is why she makes him a real boy at the end. We'll get to that.
Like, yeah, whatever.
So he's like, well, how do I do that? How do I prove that? And she says, well, you have to follow your conscience. And he goes, what's my conscience? And that's when Jiminy Cricket jumps in and goes, well, I'll tell you what a conscience is. And so then he introduces himself to the fairy.
Proceeds to do the worst job at being a conscience.
We'll get into that very quickly, I promise.
That is my last note in this. That is my last note in my notebook, is that Jiminy is a horrible conscience. And I'll get into why later, but I agree, Abby.
I think we all know why.
Yeah, but she makes him Pinocchio's official conscience. And so she says, okay, have fun. Be good so you can be a real boy. And so she goes back into the night, and Pinocchio's like, hey, cool, I'm alive. And so he's talking to Jiminy and like trying to figure out how to be good and what a conscience is and stuff. And this leads into a wonderful song, Give a Little Whistle, where Jiminy tells him that he's always there for him and that if he ever needs anything, to just whistle. And Pinocchio learns that he can't whistle at first. And so he's like, what if I can't whistle? And he's like, well, yell Jiminy Cricket. And so there's so many wonderful visual gags and audio gags in this song. And it's such a wonderful song. This is one we grew up with. It was definitely on some of the
Jiminy Cricket
VHSs.
Flirting with more female clock people.
Yeah, I'm gonna this is where Adam's gonna be a bit of a downer because I have a lot of the same feelings of Give a Little Whistle and Whistle While You Work, where I'm like, these are very fun songs that I do like. I think wholly it is unnecessary. Every other song in this movie serves a purpose, either an I want song, a hey, this is why this character is doing this, or kind of to establish character. And this is just a song about whistling. It doesn't bring a lot to the table.
Whistling was big in the 40s, Abby.
Whistling is fun.
Apparently.
It is fun. Well, Adam, apparently you would be a good Disney producer because they also did not think the song was necessary because they cut it out of the live action one. But anyways, we're not going to get into that again.
I don't judge that as a sign of quality. It's the live action one.
Yeah, fair. So Give a Little Whistle happens. I love the song, and it ends with Pinocchio feeling like he understands, and then he steps into some cans and trips and falls off the shelf and makes literally as much noise as humanly or puppetly possible.
Gives Geppetto a heart attack.
Yes, Geppetto wakes up screaming, and Figaro is terrified, so Figaro's trying to hide, and Cleo is there, I guess. And so Geppetto...
that fish was just...
Geppetto takes way too long to find Pinocchio, in my opinion. That's one of the only parts I feel like is too long, is he's like looking everywhere.
This is
I
finally
Pinocchio's like
one of those like, all right, moving on. I get
Pinocchio's like, I'm right here. And there was one part when Geppetto first sees Pinocchio, he goes and he throws water on himself, and Figaro gets soaked. And I thought that was pretty funny.
Someone needs to put this poor man in a home.
That was funny.
Yeah, Geppetto's getting a little.
What he's doing?
He's getting a little up there in age, but it's okay. And we'll see some more examples of why he's a little not okay in the brain later, but we'll talk about it. So he finds that Pinocchio is alive, and it's like just incredulous about it. He's like, oh my gosh, like he couldn't believe it at first, and when he realizes, and Pinocchio tells him about the blue fairy, and he realizes that he's actually alive, like he's just giddy, and they start dancing around, and he's trying to basically make a little party with all of his toys that he's sculpted, and he's just so overjoyed. And in this part, I forgot to write this down, but I love how Pinocchio sees a candle, and he sticks his finger in the candle and lights his finger on fire, and it's like, hey, look at that. And Geppetto's like, oh my gosh,
he made of wood
around, and eventually shoves his hand in Cleo's bowl, and poor Cleo ends up dealing with secondhand smoke. poor Cleo's going to have lung problems. Poor goldfish.
I don't think that's secondhand smoke at that point. It's shoved right into Cleo's gills.
Yeah. Poor Cleo was a forced smoker. But I wanted to bring up, there was a deleted scene. There's a deleted scene that happened right around here. So before they go to bed, there was a scene where after Pinocchio's fire finger, all that happened.
Which is basically just foreshadowing the rest of the movie.
Essentially. Geppetto is explaining to Pinocchio why he can't do that because he's made of wood. And Pinocchio is having such a hard time understanding why he's different from Geppetto. Like, he doesn't grasp the fact in this deleted scene that he's made of wood and Geppetto's not. And so Geppetto starts to tell him a story about Pinocchio's grandfather, who was a magnificent, towering pine tree. And the story was told visually through Pinocchio's imagination. It was while Geppetto's telling the story, you're seeing it in Pinocchio's imagination, what he's imagining. And it's this giant pine tree that has Geppetto's face and talking about all the animals that lived in the pine tree. And Pinocchio imagined all these birds and squirrels were wooden carvings that Geppetto had made. So like wooden toys and stuff is what you were seeing. And it was just Geppetto telling the story of the pine tree that Pinocchio came from, I guess, and how the pine tree ended up getting struck in the back by lightning and the bark tore like it was pants that got split in the seat. And then he had to like take vines and tie it. I don't know. It was kind of weird. So it makes sense that they deleted it, but it was kind of interesting. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up.
I was about to say that definitely sounded like one that needed to be cut.
There's a couple,
indeed, but I'm like, no.
Yeah, there's a couple deleted scenes that we'll get into. There's two more after this one that I'm going to bring up, and all of them are definitely like there was good reason for them to be deleted scenes. But it's interesting to know that that was a part of the process of the story at one point. So, anyways, after he puts the fire off of his finger and gives Cleo lung cancer, they go back to sleep and they go back to bed. And when they're in bed, Pinocchio keeps asking questions, and Geppetto's like, "Well, you're going to go to school tomorrow," which I never quite understood that. Like, your puppet just came to life, and you're going to immediately send him to school.
I had a problem with that time. He literally, like, that night is like, "Oh, you're going to school tomorrow, by the way." And I'm like,
give him a chance to like realize he's alive. Let him get used to the world and learn a few things on his own first.
Especially considering the fact that he was literally born yesterday.
Quite literally.
And it's just like, all right, just shoves him out in the world.
Yeah. I remember when I was a kid,
already in his like the childhood phase of the why? Like, you don't want to send that kid to school.
No,
he's gonna he's gonna destroy that teacher's mind.
He may have the body of like a 5 or 6 year old, but he has the mind of a toddler. He is still functionally a toddler. You gotta give him a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I was a kid, I was really annoyed by Pinocchio. I thought he was so annoying. But now that I've watched it as an adult, like, it makes sense why they give him the dialogue and the personality that they do, because he literally was born like a day before the movie. Like,
he has no idea.
Like, everything that happens in the movie is like the day after he was brought to life. So like, I'm not irritated by it anymore. It's more of, I understand he genuinely doesn't understand anything, and he's trying to understand as much as he can. And there's so much information coming at him at once. So they end up going to sleep, and then you open the next scene with the next morning in the village, and there's this beautiful sweeping shot that they made it to look like it was one continuous take. Like, if you're filming a live action scene, you want to do everything in one take. That's what they did, and it sweeps and goes through the town, and you end up zooming into the front of Geppetto's house, and the door opens, and you see kids everywhere playing, and Pinocchio and Geppetto and Figaro come outside, and Pinocchio's ready to start running off with the kids, and Geppetto has to hold him back. And he does the infamous scene, "Turn around so I can get a look at you." And Pinocchio does the full 360 turn, but his head stays in the one position, which is pretty great. And then he gives him an apple, and
that's fun.
It's like, "Give that to your teacher." And then Figaro, who has to do everything, is like, "Hey, bro, he needs his book." So he drags out the book. And then Geppetto tells Pinocchio, "Go straight to school, come straight back. I can't wait to see you." And Pinocchio's like, "Okay." So he goes, and then you cut to Jiminy Cricket running, and he's like, dang, first day on the job.
Figaro starts skipping behind him.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. He has to grab Figaro, and he's like, you're not going to work or to school.
Would have been such a shorter movie if Figaro had gone with him.
I know. Figaro would have been like, bro, avoid them. But anyways, we'll get to that. So you see Jiminy Cricket running after Pinocchio, literally his first day on the job, and he overslept. Good old Jiminy. Good old Jiminy. And then while Pinocchio is trying to catch up to the kids, we enter Honest John Foulfellow and his mute cat partner Gideon, who I remembered not liking them as a kid, but I love these two characters. I think they're so fun. The personalities are so well defined. I love them. So
they're
they
great.
come in and they're just walking and talking, and I love. Adam.
Yeah, everyone else is like human. Why are they?
I hadn't thought about that.
Everyone else in this movie is a human. We have Figaro, who is a cat. It is very clearly a cat. No one else we see in this movie is an animal. And later, kids are being turned into animals to be sold. And these two are just anthropomorphic animals.
Yeah, I don't really know what to say about that, so we're just going to keep going. But I love the line where they're talking and walking, and he goes, oh, look, a little wooden boy. And then all of a sudden he goes, a little wooden boy. And, that's when they're like, oh. And they see a poster that says Stromboli, which we learn that there's this puppet master Stromboli who travels around and does puppet shows with marionette puppets. And so they're like, man, I bet we could sell him to Stromboli and get a load of cash. And then he says the one-off line that is really easily missed that I loved. And he says, remember when I tried to pass you off as a puppet, Gideon? And just the thought of that is really funny. So then they go.
That's a very funny concept that I would have loved to see a short of or something.
I also love that it makes it feel like they truly have known each other for a while. Like they actually have a relationship. They've been doing this kind of stuff together for a while. They're not just exist just for this story. It's like it feels like they have lives outside of Pinocchio's story.
Oh yeah, and it's very obvious that the animators and the workers on this film were working really hard to give that much more depth and personality to the characters, and it's really evident. But then Gideon and John go and they trip up Pinocchio so they can talk to him, and they start telling him about how glamorous the life of an actor is, and convince him that it's so much easier to make your father proud by doing that. And Pinocchio's like, I mean, having been alive for less than 24 hours, he's like, oh, okay, cool. That sounds great. I want to make my father proud. So he goes with them, and we get into the song Hi Diddle Dee Dee, which is a wonderful song. A lovely little toe tapper. A silk hat and a watch of gold with a diamond chain and all that jazz. And so that's a fun song. And during the song, you see Jiminy trying to get Pinocchio, and he's like, dude, where are you going? And finally, Jiminy ends up on top of Honest John's hat, and Gideon sees him and takes out this comically large hammer from nowhere. And in trying to hit Jiminy, he hits John. It's a typical cartoon gag with the giant mallet hitting each other, but it still works. As typical of a joke as this is, I feel like they made it work pretty well. And so they end up hitting each other with mallets, and Jiminy's like,
it's very by the numbers, but it's also so early that I'm like, it's fine, and it's done well.
Yeah. And Jiminy is like, come on, Pinocchio, you got to tell him you got to go to school. And Pinocchio's like, okay. And then when they're like, they finally are conscious again, and they're like, okay, Pinocchio, what do you say? And Pinocchio goes, bye, Jiminy. And then all of a sudden he's gone, going to be an actor. And Jiminy's like, what did we just talk about?
Bro. This is one of the things that actually made me mad at Pinocchio. I'm like, dude, I get if it's like, I'm eager to please. So whoever said it last, but he's like, all right, Jiminy, I'll say no. You ready to go? Sure am. Bye.
I know. And I love the throwaway line when Pinocchio's like, well, his name's Honest John, so he must be telling the truth. And Jiminy goes, dude, if he's got honest in his name, he's not honest. And Pinocchio just doesn't get it. You can see it on the way they animated his face. He's like, he just does not comprehend that concept.
You just see the loading screen.
I know it's
Blink.
The color rainbow wheel of death on Max. So then we cut to Stromboli's puppet show, and it is assumed that Honest John and Gideon sold Pinocchio to Stromboli to be in the show, and Stromboli has already made this whole show surrounding Pinocchio. And so Stromboli intros his show, and Pinocchio comes out and he starts singing I've Got No Strings, which has become synonymous with this movie and with the character Pinocchio. It's
Ultron.
such a... Yes, I was actually talking to Adam about this the other day. When I was in high school and I first watched Marvel's Avengers Age of Ultron, that song came on, and I was watching it at like midnight. It was in the middle of the night, whatever. So it was dark, and that song came on, and it freaked me out. I had lots of anxiety in high school. And so that freaked me out, and I remember for years, anytime I thought about Pinocchio, I thought about Ultron, and it kind of would send a shiver down my spine just because it's just a freaky delivery. But, I mean, that I've Got No Strings has become such a synonymous
also,
song.
The slight adult jokes in that song with the other puppets interacting with him and the way they would, like, move around him and that kind of stuff, I was genuinely shocked by.
Yeah.
And yet another example of Jiminy Cricket being just absolutely obsessed with women.
He's thirsty.
Yeah, he's definitely enamored by the puppets, which each of those puppets are just blatant representations of different countries, which that was a norm back then. So we don't necessarily have to get into a racism topic. So
we just understand
it's not as bad as some future movies, but so of course Pinocchio starts the song singing, trips down the stairs, and his nose gets stuck in the hole in the stage. And Stromboli's like about to punch him in the face, and then he sees that the crowd loves it, and he's like, "Oh yeah, this is my sweet precious Pinocchio." And so then Pinocchio does the rest of the song, and there's a line that Jiminy delivers in the middle of the song that is priceless. He says, "What's an actor want with a conscience, anyways?" And I
that
think
cracked me up.
That was so funny.
Also, just the idea of the fact that, like, when you go into the acting business, you sell yourself, essentially. And so that's kind of what it was like for
all the slights made to actors are so funny.
I know.
And so then the song ends, and Pinocchio once again falls and gets his nose stuck, but he pulls it up, and the hat from one of the puppets falls on him, and the plank on his nose makes him look like one of the puppets, one of the Russian puppets with the big hat and the beard, which is a funny little nod. And everybody loves him. Stromboli made tons of money. Pinocchio thinks it's so great that people are clapping for him. He doesn't know what clapping is, so he starts clapping
He does
too.
the little kid thing where they start clapping when everyone else is clapping, and it made me so sad. Like, this is a child.
It's really cute, but it is sad. It's like, oh, he literally doesn't understand what's happening because he was born yesterday. It's really precious.
Are absolutely being taken advantage of. This is horrible.
I know, and he has no idea that he's being used. And then we see that Geppetto has been waiting. They've been waiting to eat dinner for Pinocchio to come home. And he's so nervous. And, like, that makes me feel emotions, too. Like, Geppetto has no idea where his new son is. And so he ends up going out to look for Pinocchio out in the rain. And it's
it kind of is his fault for sending out Pinocchio, who he's very aware has no idea what the heck is going on right now to school. And
he also could have gone and picked Pinocchio up from school. But
yeah,
this was a different time.
Could have just waited. He didn't have to walk to school.
He's kind of not doing anything.
Or could have walked him to school.
Yeah, this was kind of set in a different time, though. So, anyways,
Bro doesn't have a life.
He goes to search for Pinocchio, and then we cut to Pinocchio with Stromboli in the cart thing.
Wagon.
And Geppetto... Yeah, the wagon. Thank you. That's the word.
That scene is so sad to me.
It is sad.
You're welcome. Oh, God.
Stromboli is counting his money, and Pinocchio's like, "Oh, I can't wait to tell my father." And Stromboli starts laughing. He's like, "Oh, that's funny. You think you're going to see your dad?" And Pinocchio, not knowing why Stromboli's laughing, thinks that, "Oh, I was funny." So he starts laughing too. And then he's like, "Okay, well, I'm going to go home and see my father. I'll see you in the morning." And Stromboli blows up. He's like, "You think you're actually going to leave?" And this is when it's made apparent that he's being taken advantage of. And Pinocchio starts to get kind of scared.
A bird
And he's thrown into a bird cage and locked in there. And Pinocchio just panics, like any of us would. And he starts screaming for Geppetto and for Jiminy Cricket and trying to get out.
They can't
And
hear him.
the
And
wagon
it's
starts
so
moving.
sad.
Stromboli starts leaving town, and you can see lightning flashing, and the bird cage is swinging, and Pinocchio is stumbling everywhere. Which, by the way, the animation is beautiful. They make you feel so much emotion with hand drawings. That's just incredible. But he just looks so scared, and that was one of the times I felt so much emotion. I was like, "This is a hand-drawn movie that's making me want to cry."
Let me say, yes, Snow White was slow and there wasn't much going on, and yes, Pinocchio has a lot more going on, but everything that's going on is bad and sad and just it stresses me out, and it just makes me so sad that this kid can't catch a break.
Yeah. And Jiminy Cricket sees the wagon leaving, and he's like, "Good riddance." Also, being a terrible conscience. And then he's like, "Well, I guess I could give him."
I was about to say, this is where I'm going to bring it up, because every time Pinocchio decides to do something without Jiminy, or like not listen to him, Jiminy is immediately, without a degree of separation, just immediately is like, "Well, fine, then he doesn't need me. I'm just going to go the other way." And it's like, you are the conscience, my dude. You have to be like, no. We have to, and even if he does bad things, you have to follow him throughout. You have to follow through and be like, now you see, this is what happens when you don't listen to your conscience. Now we're gonna go. No, he's straight up like, "Well, fine, I don't need this." Worst conscience.
And they give him some growth. There is a bit of a character arc throughout the movie where the farther in the movie we get, he does begin to learn his lesson a little more quickly. There's not much growth, but it is a little bit more evident where he sees like, "Oh no, actually Pinocchio does need me." Not much, but it's there. It's there. You can see the effort. They were trying to give him a character.
I disagree, because even on Pleasure Island, the second he's like, "Well, we don't need to go here," and Pinocchio's like, "But I'm having fun." "Well, what does that guy know anyway?" As he storms off.
But by the time you get to Monstro, Geppetto is like, "Pinocchio's right. We do need to go look for Geppetto, but I'm not going to leave him behind. He does need me." And so there's a little bit of growth, but we'll get to that. So Jiminy goes and hops into the wagon to say goodbye to Pinocchio, and he sees that Pinocchio's locked up, and he's like, "Crap." And so he goes inside of the padlock to try to unlock it to help Pinocchio get safe, and he can't because it's rusted in the lock. He breaks the mechanism on the inside, so it's like completely jammed. And so then they're like panicking.
I love that he's trying not to get Pinocchio's feelings hurt and try not to worry him, because he's just like, "Oh yeah, I got this. It's just a little rusty. Must be one of the newer models." Just trying to get it out until finally he's like, "Yeah, I got nothing."
Yeah, I love that. But then the mechanism breaks and he can't get it open. And then the worst part of the movie happens. Geppetto is looking in the streets in the rain, and he stops to let the wagon go pass in front of him, and then goes in the opposite direction to keep looking for him. And I'm like, Geppetto, he's right there. Oh, that part, I hate that part.
I did not expect these emotions to happen, and like I'm like, I do not care about Geppetto. I'm gonna be 100%.
Right.
He's whatever. But absolutely, when watching that, my heart broke.
Especially because the thunder explodes right as he calls
cut
out
off the end of his call.
Oh gosh, that just destroyed me.
These writers be really trying to get to us. So anyways, they're freaking out, and Jiminy and Pinocchio are like, "Well, I don't know what we're going to do because there's no way to get out of this." And then the blue fairy shows up in the wagon, and it's like, "What happened?" And
she just happens to come by,
and Pinocchio's like, "Oh, the worst thing happened." And he starts telling all these lies because he's embarrassed, because he's like, "I don't want the blue fairy to know that I failed." And this is the iconic Pinocchio thing where every time he says a lie, his nose gets longer. And y'all, he literally creates life. His nose gets so long that birds are created. And then it gets even longer, and he creates death. The leaves on his nose die. This wooden puppet got some skills, y'all. That's all I gotta say about that.
It's apparently some kind of deity.
Yes. So we're gonna move on from that because I don't have any more to say other than he literally created birds. Anyways,
that's the only
have more to say about this because one, this happened way later in the movie than I thought it would, and then like Abby was about to say, this is the only scene where this is. I thought this from this point on was a big part of the movie, but it's just this scene and it has no relevance to the rest of the plot.
It does have
except
some
that Pinocchio
relevance
stops telling lies. I think
I was gonna say it does show that when Pinocchio, when he genuinely realizes the consequences to certain actions, he learns and he changes. He learned that there were genuine and terrible consequences for him for lying. And he learned and he told the Blue Fairy, "Oh, I'll never lie again." So the Blue Fairy shrinks his nose and breaks open the cage. And you don't see Pinocchio lie the rest of the movie. He does continue to mess up, but it's always in different ways. I'm so sorry if y'all can hear my cats. They're being wild. He does mess up in different ways, but he learned from that lesson, I'm not going to lie anymore because it's scary and I can't do anything about that. And I don't want a big nose again. So he messes up in different ways, but he consistently learns from his mistakes.
I still say it had nothing to do with the rest of it. Because literally just have Jiminy open the lock instead of the Blue Fairy coming, making his nose grow, him learning, him start lying then, and then learn not to lie. And it's
because if he was lying,
you don't miss another beat.
Leading up to that point, then yeah, I get it. But he didn't really deal with lying before then. I do agree. Well, yes,
he had been truthful up to that point.
We appreciate the gag that scene brought with the whole iconic nose growing when you lie, and all I can think of is Pinocchio from Shrek right now. But it's still, like that's the only time it happens, and so it didn't really seem the most necessary to me.
Speaking of Shrek, there is actually a theory that Donkey is one of the boys from Pinocchio that got turned into a donkey. That's why he can talk.
Why would you say that to me, Andrew?
It was relevant.
Destroyed my entire life.
It was relevant.
You've just destroyed
it destroyed mine too. But I saw that not too long ago on like Facebook or something, and I was like, "Oh my gosh!"
I've been seeing that.
I didn't tell y'all who voiced Pinocchio. So initially, they were going to have an adult voice Pinocchio because they hadn't ever done any child voice actors. But the directors decided that it needed to be a child because it didn't work if it wasn't a child's voice. So they had a young kid named Dick Jones to voice Pinocchio. He was, I think, 11 at the time of recording. And I think he did a wonderful job. I think he really brought a childish essence to Pinocchio. So I just realized I hadn't brought up his voice actor. And I also didn't bring up Honest John was voiced by Walter Catlett, who he was in tons of movies in like the 30s through the 50s. I didn't recognize any of them. There was one, I think it was him that was in it. It was called Bringing Up Baby. That sounded familiar to me. But he was in a ton of stuff. So, and then Stromboli, we just got to him as well, was voiced by Charles Judels. He was in a good bit of stuff in the 40s, and we'll hear him again in a second because he also voiced the Coachman. He voiced both of the villains in this movie. So we'll come back to him. Yeah, we'll come back to him in a minute. So forgot to mention a couple of those. So anyways, they wanted to, I'm pretty sure the original story of Pinocchio, the nose thing, was probably a bigger part of the story. I could be wrong. Don't fact check me, or do, whatever. So if it was a bigger part, that was their way of keeping it in the story. Either way, it's iconic, so we can't really say much about it. But the Blue Fairy lets them go, or she opens the cage for them, and they get out, and they start to race back to Geppetto's. And then we cut to some random bar somewhere, and we see Honest John and Gideon again, and they're with a third character. His name was
the Red Lobster Inn. I remember that because
they went to Red Lobster.
Yes, it was Red Lobster Inn because like the restaurant Red Lobster. I was like, ha! I looked over at Angela and she was just shaking her head at me, and I'm like, I thought it was funny.
Yeah, they made no money off of Pinocchio. Let's be real about that. First of all, like if you look at the tiny sack of gold,
I thought you were talking about
like
the
they
movie.
had nothing. Like they're like, oh, we're gonna sell him to Stromboli for a fortune, and then you see the tiny
little
sack. I'm like, that was nothing.
Yeah.
Well,
you
they got
sold this
ripped
child
off.
into essentially slavery for nothing.
that was probably more money than what they had anyways, though. But compared to the giant sack the coachman pulls out, because the coachman's talking to them about like, hey, I'm doing this thing.
The coachman was creepy.
And if you get me this boy,
Well, he was
I'll
just
give you
like,
money.
do you want money? And they were like, all right, who do we have to kill? They immediately jumped to murder. Disney loves murder.
Yes, and we have lots of theories on that on our Snow White episode. Shameless self-promotion. If you haven't listened to it,
swear
you should go listen to our
that's
Snow
going to
White
be
episode.
a slogan of ours for this podcast. It's going to be Disney loves murder.
Disney loves
Just our
murder.
slogan. It'll be on our t-shirts.
I just don't understand what the coachman's purpose was in getting all these boys to turn into like. I mean, I get that it was like to
Money.
Sell them
It's
into-
because
I
basically
think
he hates little
Yeah.
boys. He thinks that he hates that they're disobedient and that they're destructive, and he wants to get rid of them, and he can get money from that. So I think that was kind of the whole purpose of him. But so
the animation part when he said they won't come back as boys.
Oh, I have that written
That
down.
is-
Freaky face.
Woo.
Creepy.
Oh my gosh. Ugh, I hated that.
Freakadelic. So the coachman tells Honest John and Gideon that he takes boys to a place called Pleasure Island. And they're like, but the law. Like, what if they catch you? And he said, oh, the law will never know because they don't ever come back as boys. And so that's your first little clue as like, oh, something weird's going on with this coachman guy.
Creepy
But he shows them
devil
that he'll
face.
give them lots of money for this, for getting Pinocchio for them. And the sack of gold that he puts on the table is like 5 times bigger than the one they got from Stromboli. So that's pretty funny. So then we cut back to Jiminy Cricket and Pinocchio racing home to get to Geppetto. And Jiminy's like, hey, I'll race you there. And so that's just a fun, cute little thing where they're like racing to get to Geppetto's. And Jiminy gets a little bit ahead of Pinocchio right as Honest John trips at Pinocchio. And so they come back in. And
it's just like we just got out of this.
And honestly,
mess.
this time, this is kind of back to my point, Adam. Pinocchio learns from his mistakes. He learned that when he followed Honest John and Gideon last time, he got into trouble. And he did not follow them. He said, I've got to get home. I've got to get to my
did
father.
it again.
No, they picked him up and took him.
Kidnapping.
If you notice, I mean, he didn't.
They did.
Because he kept saying, I've got to go home to my father.
He didn't resist all that much.
No, he didn't resist all that much. And when they gave him a ticket, I guess he felt special. But he didn't walk with them. They picked him up and took him. And so they gave him a ticket, in air quotes, which was just an ace of spades. It was just a playing card. But, you know, whatever. Pinocchio's a stupid kid who's been alive for less than 24 hours. He doesn't know that that's a card and not a ticket yet. So then Pinocchio ends up on the coach to Pleasure Island. And you see the coachman on this carriage that's full of these young boys.
Also, did y'all realize what was pulling the carriage?
Donkeys.
It was small little donkeys, the little ones.
Yep.
It was them.
Yep, and we'll get into why that's heartbreaking in a minute. So they end
Child
up
labor
on Pleasure.
and human trafficking.
Woohoo!
There you go.
Not to mention just completely transforming them. I mean,
So unless your child is young and won't have any idea of the concepts of those, don't let your children watch Pinocchio, because some unfortunate conversations that'll have to come from that.
Maybe we should change the slogan to Disney loves crime.
That's not a terrible slogan, but we'll come up with some. So we end up on Pleasure Island. But before we get there, actually, on the carriage, Pinocchio is sitting by a kid named Lampwick, but is also often referred to outside of the movie as Candlewick, which is really weird. But his name's Lampwick or Lampy. He's voiced by a kid named Frankie Darrow, who was in a good bit as well. I didn't recognize any of it. But Lampwick is the voice of Bad Reason for Pinocchio on Pleasure Island. You see lots and lots of fun visual gags on Pleasure Island, different stuff. There's Tobacco Row, which is a street full of places where the boys could buy cigarettes and cigars and smoke. And there's places with beer. There was a place that felt kind of like a reference to Fight Club to me. It was like, they didn't talk about it. It was just like, hey, you can go beat people up here.
There's also a place where you like destroy a building.
And
there were have a scrap here.
There were homes that you could go and destroy.
Also,
I know. I probably know what you're going to talk about, Adam, and I'll get to it.
How much is he selling these donkeys for?
I have no idea.
Why do you ask?
Is that what you were going to talk about?
No, that wasn't what I was going to talk about.
Because, do you realize how much money he has to put in to have all these attractions, buy all this stuff, and make it all free for all these kids? Like, electricity alone here would be...
Yeah, I was about to say, not to mention rebuilding and resetting for the next batch of kids.
And so he has to be making some profit off these donkeys.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and my question is, what is it that turned them into donkeys?
I have some theories. So, first of all,
disobedience. I don't know.
We see
magic. There's a blue fairy. Who cares?
We see that the coachman is not alone. Y'all notice when he tells them to lock the gates, you see all they're referenced as is the coachman's minions. They're just these they're black figures.
They're heartless.
They're just these silhouettes of freaky Abby. I hate you. Of freaky black silhouettes that you see around. They close the gates and they lock them, and I think you see them later when you see the donkeys as well. But you just see these minions, so it's like he's obviously not alone. And then you see lots of visual gags of all the boys, including Pinocchio, smoking and drinking and fighting. And I was like really shocked. I was like, oh my gosh, this is in a movie, like a kid's movie. But I had to remember this is from 1940. Like there is a different time.
This also isn't really encouraging it. It was
it was discouraging, obviously, but it was a different time. This was more appropriate because
they still took it out of the live action one though.
Oh, they did, and I'm pretty sure this is a G-rated movie because in the 40s, this wasn't super inappropriate. I mean, there's 2 curse words in this movie. They're references to a donkey, but it's still
it's more than 2, I think.
It's only said twice.
3.
Because Jiminy says
I think I counted 3.
It was either 2 or 3 times, but it's always a reference to a donkey.
Yeah.
The expletive word for a donkey. But we end up cutting to a scene where Pinocchio and Lampwick are in this hall room place, and Lampy's playing pool, and they're both smoking cigars and drinking. Yeah, it's a pool hall. Thank you. Which apparently in the 40s, pool was what Disobedient Boys played. Is kind of what they were implying.
I guess.
Yeah, it was like on the same level.
Thing is that was one of the things Jiminy harped on. He's like, "Oh, he's drinking, he's smoking, he's playing pool." I'm like, one of those things is not that bad.
My guess is that it was kind of like on a similar level with like how you would consider like poker.
Well, we saw poker in there too. There was poker there, but I guess it's because a lot of bars have pool tables in them, and so maybe that was just kind of associated with drinking and smoking, and so I guess it was like for young boys to do that is disobedient. But pool's not a bad game. Like it's a fun
Maybe
game.
It was back then. Maybe I don't know.
So that was kind of weird. But they're hanging out, and Jiminy Cricket comes in, and it's like, Pinocchio, what are you doing? He's like hanging, and Jiminy and Lampy have a couple different altercations, and they're both pretty funny because they're like so polar opposites. And there's a whole bunch of gags with the pool table. Jiminy gets crushed by some pool balls, falls down the pocket of the pool table, and some funny stuff, and calls Lampy a donkey, or says, why don't you go have it your way, make a donkey out of yourself. And walks out on Pinocchio again, which we've already talked about that. And then Jiminy Cricket, as he's trying to leave the island, he hears some ruckus and he realizes that there's not any other boys around. And so he goes to where the noise is and he peeks in this door and it's full of donkeys.
And this part is also heartbreaking.
Oh, it's the worst. And he sees that there are a bunch of donkeys that are in boxes that
my
say
roommates were in
mines.
the room with me when this scene came on, and neither of them had ever actually like watched this all the way through, and they're like, "What the heck is happening?"
I know, it's tragic. And so you see the coachman pulling donkey one by one. That has been revealed were the little boys that were turned into donkeys.
And then the one that can still talk.
And that he tears the clothes off of them, and then he asks every donkey,
Yeah, that's the one.
He asks the donkeys, "What's your name?" And if they respond, he says, "This one's defected," and throws it in a cage with the rest of them.
Which we never find out whatever happens.
And you never find out what happens.
He says not ready yet.
You hear one specifically answer. He says, "My name's Alexander. I want my mommy." And he says, "That one's defective," and throws it in there. By the way, Alexander the donkey is voiced by Dick Jones, who is the voice of Pinocchio, so he voiced both.
Oh.
You never find out what happens to Alexander. Alexander, that scene broke my heart, and I hope someday Alexander's living a happy donkey life. Because that just broke my heart.
He got sold to make glue. Next.
And so Jiminy sees that the boys are turning into donkeys, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, I have to go back and get Pinocchio." And he runs back and realizes that he shouldn't have left him. And it cuts to Lampy's playing pool, and while he's playing pool and talking, he starts slowly turning into a donkey, talking about Jiminy and how he made him mad. And Pinocchio sees him turning into a donkey, and like the faces he makes at the cigar and at the beer, so funny. And that's my theory, is that maybe there was something.
I love this scene.
I love those.
So
Those are
much.
funny.
Because he just pushes away the beer and then like tosses away the cigar. Like, oh no, this isn't good.
I'm wondering if that's what turned them into the donkeys. If there was some kind of, I mean, it's a Disney movie.
Yeah,
so
I feel like it was the beer, because you don't see Pinocchio drinking until like right before that. Like he starts turning, and then he's like, "Oh, let me stop it." So that's why he didn't fully turn into a donkey. That or could
well, I just assume it's because he got out before too long. It could also just have to do with how long they've been there. I don't know.
Yeah. Also, the huge puff of smoke that Snow White, that Pinocchio takes from the cigar, and then him making him sick. I like that because it's a good way to show kids, like, hey, don't do this.
If you're gonna do it properly.
He also
Okay,
like inhales it and then
smoke a cigar.
swallows, like doesn't exhale it either. He's just like,
yeah, which is like, you should probably not smoke a cigar, kids. Like, don't do that.
I mean, no.
But then the scene quickly turns really dark, and you see Lampy completely turn into a donkey while screaming, "I want my mom!" And that's dark, y'all. Like, that's scary.
I really, really hated that part with him turning. I've seen it was probably watching.
It was terrifying.
Of like darkest like Disney moments, and that was definitely on it.
I know a lot of kids were scarred by that moment. And then you see Pinocchio starting to turn into a donkey himself. He has the ears and the tail, and he and Jiminy are like panicking. They're like, "Oh my gosh, you're turning into a donkey! Like, we got to flee." So
I also think it's really cool that he keeps his ears and tail until the end of the movie when he's no longer a puppet. Like, it's not like it just goes away. Like, it's there.
I like that there's.
It's like it's a permanent thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Agreed.
So, they were able to get off of Pleasure Island, and they start to swim to shore, and they are able to get back, and they get to Geppetto's house, and it's empty, and it's dark. And a bird flies and drops off a note, that was so obviously...
Just the plot, like, come on.
From the Blue Fairy. That was so obviously from the Blue Fairy. Like, based on the color scheme.
Also, I gotta point out that it looks like Geppetto has been gone for over a year because of how much dust and cobwebs are in that house. But they've been gone for maybe 2 days, Pinocchio and Jiminy. Like, they have not been gone that long. but that house
Maybe
got
time
very
works
dusty
differently on Pleasure
and
Island.
dirty very quickly.
Well, like Aaron said, maybe time works differently because also it seems like he was in the in the belly of that whale for a very long time.
Yeah. So they get a note that's from the Blue Fairy, but it doesn't say it, but you can tell. And
So
it
I
says
feel like that was completely unnecessary. Like they could have shown, or somehow he could have found out, other than just the Blue Fairy saying, "Hey."
Well, I think in the original story,
Yeah,
they're
it's a
walking
little weird,
around
but
the
whatever.
village and they hear someone talking about Geppetto. I think they did that to shorten the story to keep the movie from getting too long. I'm not sure. But anyways,
That's fair, which I definitely think it was kind of it definitely needed to be shortened at this point, because this is at this point I kind of did realize I'm like, this feels like 3 different movies. I'm not
Actually,
gonna lie.
I was going to
The
mention
beginning
that.
part has a
Pinocchio was actually originally created as 3 separate short stories that they strung together to make one.
that makes a
film.
lot of sense.
They took the 3 short stories of Pinocchio. They took the 3 short stories that were written about Pinocchio, and I'm not 100% positive on this, but I'm pretty sure. They took the 3 stories and put them all together to make one long story to make the movie, which is why it feels episodic. But, I mean, the stories are all very different. So you have the Stromboli story. Hey, Distracted fam. This is Aaron from the future. We had issues with the recording software we were using the day that we did our recording session, and a lot of stuff went wrong. We had internet issues. The software messed up. Some of the files got corrupted. So I lost a little bit of audio. So I'm just popping in here to kind of tell you what conversation is no longer able to be put into the podcast. I was just explaining that the original Pinocchio story was 3 different stories. So it was the Stromboli story, the Pleasure Island story, and the Monstro story. And they took those 3 stories and they created like in-betweens, segues to go from one story to the other to make it this one continuous story about Pinocchio. And that's basically what I was explaining whenever all the software issue came up. I do still have a conversation between Andrew and Adam that somehow they were able to continue recording whenever we were having issues. So y'all go ahead and listen to their conversation about Monstro while I was attempting to fix everything that was going wrong. Yeah, so enjoy their conversation.
No, the first time Monstro is mentioned is in that letter that is dropped off by the magic bird or whatever. He's in the belly of a whale named Monstro, and it's like, why do we need to know the whale's name, first off? And second, why does this whale have teeth?
I'm gonna wait to get into a lot of the Monstro stuff until we actually get to that point, because that was something.
Yeah, that was weird.
It's something. All right, Aaron's messaging us, so give me a sec.
Yeah. So hopefully this could stay in. But yeah, I definitely agree. I felt that like the mood and everything just felt different for each third of this movie. So it would make a lot of sense that these were 3 different like short films that got put together for this one movie. That makes a whole lot of sense.
It's not something I think is a good thing, and I think they did the best they could at making a constant
cohesive story.
Yeah, but I'm like, it didn't help the movie. I'm gonna be real.
Yeah, I don't know. I still enjoyed it. It didn't take me too much out of it. It didn't take away from my enjoyment of the movie. Really, it's just definitely noticeable. I'm a lot more forgiving of movies than you are.
That is very fair.
I'm a lot more tolerable and just willing to enjoy the movie, whereas you, especially the last several years, have gotten a lot more critical on movies. So,
and I'm about to be more critical on a part coming up, because especially pacing is something this movie needs to raise its biggest issue, and it's kind of doesn't get better near the end.
Yeah. Again, part of that is being a product of the time. Like this is still early on in movie making, like filmmaking, so they were still learning some of this stuff that does and doesn't work. And I have to imagine that at the time, animated movies were a whole different, thing than
whole different beast.
Beast, yeah, than just the regular like live action movies. So.
Okay, cool. So that was the end of that audio file that I was able to extract from all of the corruption and chaos that was the recording session. But this is, from now on, the rest of the podcast we're good to go. I was able to fix it from here on out. So y'all enjoy the rest of the podcast. Future Aaron out. Peace. So they get the note from the Blue Fairy, and it is saying that Geppetto is in the belly of Monstro, the giant whale. And they're like, well, crap, that's a big whale. How are we going to do that? So, why
do we need to know the whale's name?
Because it's Thurl Ravenscroft, and he deserves having a named character.
It has a reputation, especially because every time they mention it, the fish are all just panicking.
What? Fair.
No, that's a good point,
Abby. Did not get old whatsoever after it happened the 5th time.
Did it actually happen
joke?
5 times?
It was at least 4. It was at least 4. Whatever he's
the fish swimming away when he said Monstro.
Yeah.
All the fish recoil and run away.
Yeah. That did happen.
In case they didn't put it together the first time, Monstro's a bad dude.
I really like.
I thought it was going to happen 3 times, and then it happened again, and then I think it happened again.
Yeah,
it happened more than 3. It happened at least 4 for sure.
It happened a good bit, that's for sure. But I love the way the animation looks underwater, because Pinocchio ties his tail to a rock, and they go underwater, and Jiminy puts a rock in his pants and says, "Ooh, chili," which is funny.
I do want to bring out a commentary from my roommate as he was tying the rock. She was going, "That is a bad idea. Why is he doing that? That is a bad idea." Not realizing he didn't have to breathe.
Also, he's made of wood and wood floats, so naturally he needed something to pull himself down.
Yeah,
I loved it. I thought it was a very good touch.
It was fun. She was just freaking out. He was just about to, all right, here we go. Off a cliff with a rock tied down.
The thing is, crickets also need to breathe. So I don't know how Jiminy survived Pinocchio.
But he's a magic conscience.
I was about to say,
cricket.
At this point, I think he's magic. And let's be real. Look at him and look at a cricket and tell me they're the same thing.
See? I told Aaron he does not look like a cricket, and Aaron was like, "There's like some cricket resemblance."
That is one of my first notes. Hold on, I gotta find it. I gotta find one of my first notes.
That is not a cricket.
This movie destroyed what I thought crickets looked like.
Unrealistic expectations for crickets.
But I think if he did look more like a cricket, it would be really creepy. So.
Make him a sprite, like a fairy or something.
So, anyways, well, the story has Jiminy Cricket. So, anyways, they find Monstro, end up getting eaten through a long chase scene. I'm just paraphrasing at this point.
Now I will bring up that the whale has teeth. The whale has teeth and is eating tuna. That's not how whales work.
No, not at all.
No, it's not. But you know what? It makes him scarier.
Whales that have teeth eat seals.
It's one of those things that, like, I feel like the people doing it went, "You've seen a whale before, right? Yeah. Do you know anything about them? They're big, good enough."
Good enough.
Teeth, right? Yeah, they eat like hundreds of tuna at once. Right? Yes.
Probably.
They swallow ships whole all the time. Yes.
Oh, definitely. I forgot that this was biblical times. Sorry. I love just how much suspense there is with Monstro. Like, you genuinely feel a threat because he's so big. And fast, yeah. So after this chase scene, they end up getting eaten by Monstro. And in the belly of Monstro, you see...
I don't understand why they were trying to swim away from Monstro when they knew that Geppetto was in the whale's belly.
Well, I think if you were going to get eaten by a whale...
Away? This is where you wanted to be.
If you were going to get eaten by a whale and then you see the whale, you'd probably get kind of scared and be like, maybe that's not the best idea.
Maybe I don't. My dad, we're not doing that.
Sorry. So, anyways, you get into the inside of the whale and you see Geppetto on this little ship who brought his cat and his fish in a bowl on the ocean.
How did that fish? Still,
Cleo
has probably died because it's in salt water.
More than likely, yeah. Cleo defied all logic in this whole part. But this is actually where another one of the deleted scenes is. There's a scene that shows before Pinocchio gets in the whale where Figaro catches a package with his/her. I don't know if Figaro's a boy or a girl, I'm going to be honest. But Figaro managed to catch a package while fishing, and they open the package, and it's a cookbook.
Because why not? It's just there.
And they're starving. Like, they're literally hallucinating. They're so hungry. And the first page they open the cookbook to is fish. And Figaro sees Cleo. And Figaro, for about 5 minutes, tries to eat Cleo. And Geppetto...
Well, Geppetto is, first of all, beating up that cat for trying to eat it, and then tries to eat it himself, but then stops.
It's borderline animal
oh, no,
abuse.
it's wrong. And then Figaro tries to eat him again, so he beats up the cat again.
It's borderline animal abuse. He's, like, beating on Figaro, and is like, you cannot eat Cleo. And then he starts to want to eat Cleo. Geppetto's like, oh, but that would be good. And Figaro's like, oh, okay, so we're doing this.
I think it's safe to say they made the right choice taking the scene out.
Yes.
Oh, definitely. And then Geppetto's like, oh, no, Figaro, that's bad. That's bad. You can't eat Cleo. Like, he wasn't just sitting there about to eat Cleo. And poor Cleo. So much trauma.
You can't eat Cleo, but I can.
Poor Cleo. So, anyways, that scene was deleted for a reason. But Pinocchio ends up inside of the whale, and they're like, oh my gosh, we're going to die in here, but at least we're together. And
they have pepper on them.
There's a bunch of funny stuff, and no, it's not pepper. Pinocchio finally realizes the best way to get out is he lights a fire.
Which, honestly, he's very smart.
Abby, that's Phineas and Ferb and the giant robot.
What?
Doofenshmirtz with the giant robot and the pepper.
Oh, yes.
There was some lag, so we didn't hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. So Pinocchio decides to start piling all the wood together and sets it on fire, even though they're on a wooden boat. It doesn't, I don't know. It's weird. But everything's set on fire, and Geppetto's like, no, stop. And Pinocchio's like, dude, I'm trying to make him sneeze this out. Exactly. So Monstro...
This is also another one of my problems with Pinocchio, because while I understand he's like, no, I have an idea, I have a great idea, he does not run it by Geppetto at all. He's like, oh, I have an idea, and just starts burning stuff on fire, and Geppetto's like, stop, no, and he's like, no, I have an idea, and does not stop.
Yeah. I forgot to mention this earlier.
And doesn't explain how he's going to make him sneeze, and starts lighting things on fire.
I know, it's so funny. And speaking of fire, I forgot to mention this when we were watching it earlier, when Geppetto is startled awake because Pinocchio's alive, and he goes and he lights a match, and he lights it on the bottom of his shoe, because that was a normal thing, using the bottom of your shoe as a strike to light the match. And I was watching it with Abby and with my wife Madeline, and she didn't realize he lit it on the bottom of his shoe. She goes, he just pulled a lit match out of his pocket. And she was so confused until I helped her realize that he lit it on the bottom of her shoe.
Actually, no, that was me. And I thought he reached under his robe and just grabbed a match.
I thought it was Maddie.
Like reached under his robe, and I thought he just pulled out a match, and I was like,
yeah, I had to tell Abby that he used the bottom of his shoe, but that was really funny. So
I was incredibly concerned. I was like, sir, where are you keeping those?
That was another thing that happened with fire. I thought it was funny. So anyways, they use the fire to create smoke, and the smoke makes Monstro sneeze a bunch. And in that sneezing, they get on this little dinghy, this little boat, and they are able to escape Monstro's stomach. Raft, thank you, Andrew. Gosh, I can't do words.
And then it proceeds to sneeze them out, and then inhale them back in, and then sneeze them out, and then inhale them back in.
He does sneeze a lot, and I love. It's another little throwaway line that Cliff Edwards does. Whenever Monstro sneezes, you hear Jiminy go, "Gazoon-tight." It's just so precious. And then Monstro...
I did appreciate
I
that.
want you to imagine for a second, as Monstro has sneezed them out, and when he's kind of going for them again, or just when he is surfaced and there is smoke billowing out of him, I want you to imagine you are a regular sailor out fishing, doing his job. You see a whale surface and is billowing smoke. I want you to imagine that is the most horrible day of your life. That is you have found
And to
God
see-
in that moment.
And to see a man and a
it's the
living
end of times,
puppet
in your opinion.
come out of the whale on the boat.
Yeah.
It's just a lot.
You
It's just
see
a lot.
Pinocchio just push the drink away.
But anyways, Monstro chases them. I still don't understand how they managed to out paddle Monstro, but it's a movie, so we're just not going to question it. And they finally managed to make it to shore.
I'm sure the blue fairy
And
helped them.
while we were watching it, we noticed that Figaro and Cleo weren't there, and I was like, "Oh my gosh! If this cat and fish just show up in the next scene like they were there the whole time, I'm going to be so upset." And then when you see Geppetto finally make it to shore, you just see Figaro and Cleo wash up on the shore, and I loved that. I thought that was so funny. I was like, "That's the best way to bring them back."
And the fact that fish is still in the bowl,
Right.
which is just like, how did you manage to?
How
Right,
that
I'm
bowl is
just-
still intact, I will never understand.
Right. That's what I'm telling you. But and then we get to the funniest scene in the whole movie where Geppetto's looking for Pinocchio, and you look and you just see Pinocchio dead, face down in the water, his donkey ears floating.
Aaron,
It's sad.
you
It's
said that's the
Jiminy
funniest
Cricket
scene in the movie.
looking.
that's right. It's funny
It-
because
it
the
was
way
a
they
little
animated
funny
him.
To see Pinocchio just face
It's
down
obviously
in the
it's
water.
really sad to see
But
that
it was still
Pinocchio had
very
died, but it's a little comical the way that they drew him because he's just kind of floating there. Which this is where the other deleted scene was. This was an alternate ending. So initially, Geppetto died.
Ooh.
Originally, Geppetto was the one that
Really?
died, and Pinocchio just sobbed over Geppetto's body.
Oh yeah, that would have
And-
been awful.
The blue fairy comes back and brings him to
Oh,
life, and
that's
that's when the blue fairy makes Pinocchio real, and all that happened on the beach, and that was how the movie ended. That was the initial story arc. So obviously that was a smidge too dark, so they changed it, and I think that was for the
Like,
better.
It wouldn't have been terrible because it is one of those like, hey, even if you're doing right, the consequences of your wrong actions will happen. Even if
Yeah.
you're like, no, I've learned my lesson. Cool. Bad stuff's still gonna happen because of it.
Yeah. So I'm glad they took out that ending because that's a little too dark. But they find that Pinocchio did not make it. He did not survive the Monstro chase. So then we
Yeah,
cut.
he can survive dropping from a cliff into the bottom of the ocean. I just find funny the things that he
I
can
don't
and
get it.
cannot survive.
I don't understand. I'm not questioning it.
Our new favorite
Then
term,
instead of,
Disney logic.
like, yeah. And then they take him back to Geppetto's house and put him on the bed instead of having a burial or anything, any kind of funeral type thing for the dead
Well,
boy, even though he's
All I
technically
He's
can
a-
imagine is a burial and it's just a tree starts growing.
I was thinking Viking style funeral where they just burn him on a pyre. That's even funnier.
That's so much worse.
Andrew,
I
that's
know.
that's Andrew, that's kind of dark.
He's a wooden puppet. I'm sorry.
Exactly. That's why there wasn't a funeral. He's made of wood. He didn't need to be buried.
No, he's just
But-
a puppet.
But he had donkey tail and ears. Those would start rotting.
Okay, obviously this was kind of a weird movie. We're aware of that. But the blue fairy ends up coming back.
Way too logically about this.
We do. The blue fairy ends up coming back yet again and revives Pinocchio and has decided that Pinocchio, because he acted so selflessly in saving Geppetto,
From the problems that he caused in the first place.
okay, technically you're right, but just focus on the magic part of it and it's fine. It's fine if you focus on the magic. And she makes Pinocchio a real boy, which is still kind of shocking visually.
I
It's
don't
weird
like
to see
the
it.
way that he looks as a real boy. It looks weird. Like he
I
looks
hate it. I hate
less.
it so
I
much.
hate
looks-
it.
He looks more real as the puppet than he did as the
Less
boy.
It's just-
believable.
It's just because that's what we're used to seeing is puppet Pinocchio. But I love the line where he's like, "Father, why are you crying?" And he goes, "I'm crying because you're dead." No, I'm not. Yes, you are, son. You're dead.
He's like, shut up,
He
you're
goes,
dead.
but
This
but
guy
father,
needs
I'm
to be
right
checked
here.
into a
And then
mental
he's like, oh my
institute.
gosh, you're alive.
Seriously.
He tells his son that's speaking to him that he's dead. He brings his cat and his fish. He brings his cat and his fish onto a boat to go find his living puppet boy, who he tells is dead, even though he's speaking to him. He's got some stuff going on in his brain. I'm gonna be a little real. Maybe I'm not Geppetto. Maybe I'm Jiminy Cricket. I already said I was Geppetto. But anyway, so then they start dancing again, and then you have the bookend where Cliff Edwards starts singing When You Wish Upon a Star, like he did at the beginning. And it says the end. And we have ended the movie. And that is Pinocchio.
Jiminy Cricket gets his conscience badge.
Yeah,
You're right, I forgot about that. I'm so sorry. It's late while we're recording this, so I'm a little
Yeah, how
scatterbrained.
dare you, Aaron?
The Blue Fairy makes Jiminy Cricket an official conscience and gives him his shiny gold
I don't think
badge.
he earned it, but okay.
You know.
He did none of all the rewards they receive at the end, they did not earn.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, Disney magic, Disney logic. What are you going to do? So that is the end of the movie, and I have one other fun fact.
Do we have a pouty princess moment in this one?
No, there's no pouty princesses in this one. There might be something that we could technically.
Cleo pouts a few times.
I was like, Cleo.
Cleo. You're right, Adam. Cleo can be a princess. On this episode
Cleo,
of Pouty...
He referred to her as his mermaid. So.
He did. He said, my little water baby, my mermaid. So, on this episode of Pouty Princess, we have Cleo the goldfish who pouts because Figaro won't kiss her.
That dude is strangely attached.
I meant
goldfish.
Figaro and said Cleo, but I like it better. I'll go with Figaro.
They're kind of both Pouty Princesses. We can put Figaro and Cleo in the Pouty Princess category. So one more fun random fact. This is from the interview with Walt. And I just forgot to mention this earlier, during the making of Pinocchio, he would go down to the studio on Saturdays when there was no one there, so he could take his own time to kind of walk through the storyboards and look at the artwork that had been done. And the animators started theorizing that he was going down there. So they would leave things in places like random pieces of blank paper and try to leave them in specific messes to see if he would move anything while he was there. And he caught on that they were doing that. So he would, even if he had to move stuff, he would put them back in the exact spot that they were to mess with them. And so that's just really a fun little fact that Walt talked about in that interview, is that like, even like during the making of this, they had fun. I just think that's cute. So that's Pinocchio. Pinocchio's fun. It's a good movie. Yeah.
I still didn't like it that much.
Adam, give me your favorite character, song, and scene.
All right, so favorite character in, I want to say Jiminy, but especially the first 10 to 30 minutes, I really like Jiminy Cricket. The longer he's there, the less I like him, because I'm like, you're actively not doing your job. You're actively, you're trying, but actively oh, well, I've hit a roadblock anyways. So my favorite character is Figaro. I love that sassy little cat. Everybody that Figaro is sassy towards absolutely deserves it.
Oh, absolutely.
Favorite song is Hi Diddly Dee. I just think that's a fun one. It's super fun. The visuals are fun during it. The music itself is really catchy and a fun little march. And then my favorite scene, this is the one thing I forgot to think about. I'm about to be real unpopular. Where the kids are turning into donkeys.
Adam, no!
Because that is the most heartfelt scene, and that is the one scene that I'm like, you put genuine emotion into this. This is it was like you delivered on this scene specifically. You knew what this was, and you hit it out of the park.
Yeah.
And then do I give my rating now or after? I can't remember.
No, we'll do ratings in a minute. All right, thanks. Andrew.
Yes. Let's see. My favorite character, I'm going to actually stick with Jiminy Cricket. I think he had good jokes throughout. I will agree that as it goes on for a while, he is terrible at doing his job until like the very end, when he's actively trying to get in the mouth of Monstro to get back to Pinocchio. It's like the one time he's actually trying to really do his job, but I still really enjoyed him throughout the whole movie, and he's become a very iconic Disney character. So he's got my vote. My favorite song, I'm actually going to go with "Give a Little Whistle." I have always loved that song. I've forgotten about that song when I started watching the movie, and then it got to it, and I was like, oh yeah, because that was on one of the Disney sing-along VHSs that we had. And I always have loved that song, so I'm gonna stick with that one. My favorite scene, I think, would be, I like the song "Give a Little Whistle" better as a song, but I think the scene of Little Woodenhead in that song is fabulous with all of the Figaro stuff and everything, and Jiminy Cricket with like interacting with different things while trying to remain like unseen. I thought that was like some of the best scene work in the movie, so I'm gonna go with that one.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Abby?
Favorite character is most definitely Figaro. Favorite song, probably "When You Wish Upon a Star," because it's a really pretty song, and just it feels like Disney's theme song too, and it's cool because for a long time I didn't realize that came from Pinocchio. There weren't many scenes that I was too crazy about in the movie because it was all very stressful and just but I honestly, my favorite scene is probably when Geppetto and Figaro went to bed, and then he kept talking, and Figaro kept getting mad, and then I just thought that was really funny, and they did it a lot, but every time it kept getting funnier because they kept it just kept getting more annoyed.
Yeah, that was a cute one. Thanks. Yeah, my favorite character is also Figaro. I think that we're basically in agreement, the four of us, that Figaro is easily like the best character in this movie. I do want to give a shout out to "When You Wish Upon a Star" for the song, because that's become such an iconic song. But my favorite song is "Little Wooden Head." I've always loved that song. I know it's really short and there's not a lot of vocals to it, but I just always love that song. I love the melody. I think it's so fun. I love the animation in it. I think it's just great. And my favorite song, my favorite scene is kind of echoing Adam a little bit. It's when Pinocchio is trapped in Stromboli's wagon. Just because there's so much emotion there, and like I feel like you can see growth already in Pinocchio where he realizes like, oh crap, I made a mistake. Like there are consequences to my actions. I didn't listen to Jiminy and I didn't listen to my father and go to school, and now I'm trapped. And like I didn't expect to get as emotional there as I did. So yeah, I really like that scene. Adam, give me your final thoughts on the movie and your ranking.
Okay, yeah. So, final thoughts on the movie are it's good. It is definitely good, and were this the quality of Snow White or this one done first, I could absolutely agree with people having more fondness for it because it's like, oh, it's the first one, yeah. But I think this one holds up infinitely better than Snow White. It definitely has some pacing issues, and it is very clear that at one point this was three separate shorts that got pushed into one. But
yeah,
overall, I think it is a solid movie that is both fun and tells a decent story. I'm gonna give it I'm debating this. I think I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10.
Awesome. It's not terrible. It's double what you gave Snow White, so that's pretty good.
Correct.
All right.
It's double the movie.
Abby, why don't you give us some closing thoughts and your ranking?
Overall, it was a good movie. I could see a lot of growth in just animation, storytelling, all of it from Snow White. It was a lot darker of a movie, which, Disney did do a lot darker stuff. I mean, just wait till we get like to the Black Cauldron and movies like that. But it just wasn't really my cup of tea. And it wasn't necessarily because it was darker. I just wasn't crazy about it, but I can appreciate just all that they accomplished through it, and that they did have some really good moments. So I'll give it like a 4 out of 10.
Awesome. Andrew, go ahead and give me your closing thoughts and letter grades.
I enjoyed this movie a lot more than I was expecting to going in. And a lot more than I ever remember enjoying it. So it was a very pleasant surprise for me. I will agree with what Abby has said. It's a very stressful movie. But it doesn't have many songs compared to Snow White. Snow White had more songs, but this one doesn't have any bad songs, like Adam was saying earlier. Every song is a very good song in this movie, and for that, it definitely helps jump it up as well. The story overall was more engaging, so this is definitely going to have a higher ranking for me. So I'm going to give it about a 6, I think.
Awesome.
Out of 6 out of 10, because it's definitely it's not one of the best. It definitely still has its flaws, but was definitely a very good step in the right direction for Disney, and like you said, has become a legacy for, if no other reason, for When You Wish Upon a Star, and Jiminy Cricket, the character. So like it definitely has cemented its place in Disney legacy.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. I love this movie. I love this movie a lot more than I was expecting to. I think that it is underappreciated. I think this is become such a classic and such a staple for Disney. And I don't think that this movie gets the love that it deserves, honestly. So I like to be on the optimistic side of things, but this movie has become quite literally a legacy of Disney because of When You Wish Upon a Star. And so for that, I'm going to give it a little bit of extra points, because I was initially going to say 6 like Adam, but I think I want to give it a 7, just because When You Wish Upon a Star has just become so incredible. Awesome. So we've got a 4, 2 6s, and a 7. So in case y'all are wondering, I'm going to be keeping track of our rankings, and at the end of this podcast, whenever we finish all the movies, we'll go back and I'll look at, I'll share like the top 5, or the movies with the top 5 rankings that we've given it, and the top 3 or bottom 3 or whatever. And, I'll add them up and figure out which movies we unanimously liked
Disney
most
movie
and unanimously hated the most. Because we'll probably do some sort of season finale special episode. So that'll be really fun. But thanks everybody for coming in and listening to another episode of Distracted Quartet of Chaos. We were really excited to talk about 1940s Pinocchio. I think it's a charm of a movie. I'm excited to continue this podcast with another, in my opinion, a charm. Next time, we're going to be watching Disney's Fantasia. Lots of mixed emotions.
Fantasia next?
Lots of mixed emotions and mixed opinions on Fantasia. But
are we also going to be doing Fantasia 2000?
Yes, but that came out in the 90s or 99 or 2000.
No, I know that, but I was just wondering if we're going to do them as two separate things or just combine them.
Oh, they're two separate movies completely. They were released as two separate movies. So we're going to go and watch Fantasia. Make sure that you guys watch it at home. If you're watching along with us, that's
going to be an interesting review.
Be sure to, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. And, if you like us, you could give us 5 stars. I'm not going to complain or fish or anything, but I don't think there's a way to rate on Spotify, but definitely, give us a like and follow us on both. If you want to send us any questions or have us, what, Andrew?
I didn't say anything.
Okay, anyways, if you have any questions that you're wanting to send us, or if you have any questions you want us to talk about, or you have a question about something we didn't cover on a movie, you want us to talk about something like, hey, what's your favorite Renaissance era Disney movie? Whatever. You can send us an email at distractedqoc, as in Quartet of Chaos, distractedqoc@gmail.com. So feel free to email us.
All lowercase?
Any
no
questions?
Space?
All lowercases, no spaces. Thank you, Abby. Feel free to send us an email. We'll be more than happy to answer some emails at the end of our podcast. And if you leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, we'll probably read some of those. We have a couple, but they're from my wife and Andrew's fiance, so that might be a little self-centered to read those this time. But feel free to leave us a review.
Not partial whatsoever.
Oh, no, there's no partiality here. Definitely, stay tuned in. We try to release a new episode.
Whatsoever.
No bias. We try to release a new episode every other week. So stay tuned. We are happy to continue on this journey and happy to be welcoming new people to our distracted family.
We're also really hoping that in the future we will have less of an issue with lagging.
Yes, it's been a nightmare in post-editing, but
so y'all just bear with us for that.
I'm working on it. And also new issues with the cats deciding to sprint around my house while I'm recording. So, there's always going to be roadblocks, but thanks for bearing with us on it. And we'll see you next time. Try not to get too distracted. We probably will, and we can't wait to see y'all again soon. All right, bye. The Distracted podcast is inspired by Disorder Every Disney Film, which is a part of the Real Fans for Real Movies network. However, we are not affiliated with this network. We simply liked the idea. Distracted Quartet of Chaos is not affiliated with the Walt Disney Company, and our opinions should not be associated as such.